Now, just to add one last point to this, that it's about the war itself, in case you're still in doubt about whether people should have the right in the United States to protest this war, there has long been debate about how many children and women and innocent people Israel has killed in Gaza. And typically the count comes from what's called the Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas as the governing body. And that's supposed to imply that they're fabricating numbers, that what they're saying is unreliable, even though these numbers have been repeatedly verified by the World Health Organization and the UN. Also, then they just get called anti-Semitic. Even the US government has said that those numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry are almost certainly undercounting the number of people killed in Gaza because they only count the number of people who go through the morgues. But because there are so many people buried under buildings that they can't remove because they don't have the equipment or the electricity or the fuel to remove the rubble, and because there's basically no more health system in Gaza because the hospitals have all been destroyed, huge numbers of people who are being killed by the Israelis in Gaza don't go through the morgue and therefore aren't part of the official count. And people, including the United States government that's funding and arming Israel, have been saying for months that the count, if anything, is radically undercounted. Here is an article in the Lancet published just at the end of last week on July 5th. And I realize that the Lancet, unfortunately, has actually sacrificed a lot of its credibility because they're the ones who published the so-called proximal origins of the COVID-19 pandemic in early February 2020 that purported to know for certain that the pandemic was caused through natural evolution and species jumping and not through a lab leak. And there were all kinds of journalistic scandals and conflicts of interest surrounding that false proclamation in the Lancet. And I do think the Lancet should be suspect in terms of their editorial process because of that. That's part of the accountability of publishing something so irresponsible and reckless. But that doesn't mean that every study published in the Lancet is to be disregarded. And here, the Lancet has long had a reputation for editorial rigor when it comes to science, statistics, and things of that nature. And so you can take this for what it's worth based on what the evidence cited for it is. Quote, "Counting the dead in Gaza, a difficult but essential." It's published by Rashid Khatib of the Institute of Community and Public Health, Martin McKee, the Department of Public Health and Policy at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in London, Salim Youssef, the Population Health Research Institute of McMaster University, and Hamilton Health Sciences in Canada. And they say the following, quote, "By June 19, 2024, 37,396 people have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the attack by Hamas and the Israeli invasion in October 2023, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, as reported by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. The ministry's figures have been contested by the Israeli authorities, although they have been accepted as accurate by Israeli intelligence services, the UN, and World Health Organization. These data are supported by independent analyses comparing changes in the number of deaths of UN relief and works agency staff with those reported by the ministry, which found claims of data fabrication implausible. The ministry has had to augment its usual reporting based on people dying in its hospitals or brought in dead with information from reliable media sources and first responders. This change has inevitably degraded the detailed data recorded previously. Consequently, the Gaza Health Ministry now reports separately the number of unidentified bodies among the total death toll as of May 10, 2024. 30% of the 35,000 deaths were unidentified. Some officials and news agencies have used the development designed to improve data quality to undermine the veracity of the data. However, the number of reported deaths is likely an underestimate. The non-governmental organization Air Wars undertakes detailed assessment and incidents in the Gaza Strip and often finds that not all names of identifiable victims are included in the ministry's list. Furthermore, the UN estimates that by February 29, 2024, 35% of buildings in the Gaza Strip had been destroyed. So the number of bodies still buried in the rubble is likely substantial, with estimates of more than 10,000. The total death toll is expected to be large given the intensity of this conflict, the destroyed healthcare infrastructure, the severe shortages of food, water, and shelter, the population's inability to flee to safe spaces, and the loss of funding to UNRWA, one of the few humanitarian organizations still active in the Gaza Strip. In recent conflicts, such indirect deaths range from 3 to 15 times the number of direct deaths. applying a conservative estimate of 4 indirect deaths per 1 direct death to the 27,000 death reported, it is not implausible to estimate that up to 186,000 or even more deaths could be attributable to the current conflict in Gaza. Using the 2022 Gaza Strip population estimate of 2.3 million, this would translate to 7 to 9% of the total population in the Gaza Strip. 7 to 9% of the total population of the Gaza Strip killed directly or indirectly through the war in Gaza. Indirectly meaning from infections that are untreated, from injuries that are untreated, from malnourishment. Not just people who were shot or blown up in bombs and went to the morgue. There are all kinds of indirect deaths that come from, especially a siege of this kind in the Gaza Strip. Quote, a report from February 7, 2024, at the time when the direct death toll was 28,000, estimated that without a ceasefire, there would be between 58,000 deaths without an epidemic or escalation and 85,700 deaths by October 6, 2024. So, according to the study, the number is at least 70, 80,000 when you count uncounted dead people. And then if you add indirect deaths, you're up to 150, 180,000 and counting, which is 7 to 9% of the total population of Gaza that have been killed directly or indirectly as a result of the war. Now, just to indicate to you why it has been so cynical for people to call into question these numbers provided by the health ministry in Gaza, The Economist, back in November of 2023, and The Economist has been an outspoken supporter of Israel's war in Gaza. They've long been very pro-Israel. This is what they said back in November of 2023. The deaths in Gaza surpassed 14,000, according to its authorities. More than a third of the dead are children. And then they tried to analyze whether these numbers should be deemed reliable. And this is what they said, quote, the Gazan authorities' death figures, have been called unreliable by some, including Joe Biden. International agencies, however, say the overall numbers are reliable. They are compiled by hospital workers, not Hamas apparatchiks. On November 8th, in testimony to Congress, a member of Mr. Biden's team said that it was, quote, very possible that death counts were, quote, even higher than is being reported. And I think this is the key thing to take note of when it comes to the question of whether these figures are reliable. In previous conflicts, meaning in previous conflicts where Israel has bombed Gaza, the UN and other independent organizations have come up with tallies that are nearly identical to those provided by the Gaza Health Ministry. In other words, in the past, these numbers of deaths provided by the Hamas-run Gaza health industry have been extremely reliable because they simply count people who go through the morgue and they're healthcare workers doing that job. But in this case, it just stands to reason, and the data is provided in the Lancet article, that when you count the number of people under the rubble who haven't been able to be rescued and never made it to the morgue and likely never will, combined with the collapse of the healthcare system, which means people don't go to hospitals and don't die in hospitals, they die everywhere else, it's almost certainly the case that there are thousands and likely tens of thousands of people who are uncounted, but part of the death toll of people who have actually died in Gaza. Here from The Hill, back in November, they reported the death toll in Gaza is likely, quote, higher than is being reported. And that's from a U.S. official. And obviously, if the Biden administration is saying that, given that they're the ones funding and arming the war, that's something to take into account. Quote, a senior Biden administration official said the death toll of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip is likely far higher than the 10,000 number being reported by the health ministry amid Israel's war against Hamas. Barbara Leaf, Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, told a House panel those killed more than 1 month into the war are likely, quote, higher than is being cited. And of course, I don't believe assertions by the Biden administration, but in this case, when people make assertions contrary to their interests, in other words, the Biden administration is funding and arming the war in Israel, defending it and justifying it, their interest is in minimizing the death toll. If even they're saying the number of people killed in Gaza is likely higher than the official death toll, that's a statement against their interest and therefore much more reliable. Now here, just to underscore, the point is a report from the Wall Street Journal in late April of 2024. Just listen to this. Wall Street Journal is another outlet that has been vehemently supportive of the Israeli war in Gaza editorially. And yet, listen to what they report. Quote, in Gaza, authorities lose count of the dead. The collapse of hospitals and rescue services mean many now die in obscurity, meaning not counted. Quote, Gaza's Palestinian health authorities say they can no longer count all their dead. Hospital, emergency services, and communications are barely functioning. Extracting bodies from the vast number of collapsed buildings is a gargantuan task and not a priority while the war continues. The scale of the Palestinian numbers, treated with varying degrees of skepticism early on in the war, is now broadly accepted by UN experts, U.S. officials, and some Israeli military officials. But Palestinian authorities say the figures in recent months have become less accurate given the difficulty in gathering data. Quote, at the beginning we had systems, we had hospitals, said Medad Abbas, a spokesman for the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. Quote, the civil defense teams were able to get people who were stuck under the rubble, then the whole system collapsed. The Wall Street Journal goes on, quote, the true picture of the war's human toll will take a long time to emerge as thousands are estimated to remain buried under the rubble and in unmasked graves, according to local health authorities, witnesses, and the UN and the United Nations. So here's what I know. I've made my position very clear on the immorality and criminality of the Israeli war in Gaza. People can have different opinions. But when you have a war of this magnitude, of unprecedented civilian destruction, funded and armed by the United States government, what I know for certain is this, that as American citizens, we absolutely must preserve and demand the preservation of our complete and unfettered right to openly debate U.S. policy in Israel and the Israeli war in Gaza, to have the same exact free speech principles apply to criticism of Israel and their war and the U.S. support for it. And yet, since October 7th, both legislatively, on the federal and state level, culturally, politically, and in business, more and more there is a constriction around the necks of those questioning or criticizing this war in a way that is deeply unhealthy and directly contrary to everybody who has spent the last decade pretending that they believe in free speech or principles of basic liberty. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.